30 million people are slaves, half in India, states a new survey. London, October 17th, 2013. Thomas Reuters Foundation. Some 30 million people are enslaved worldwide, trafficked into brothels, forced into manual labor, victims of debt bondage, or even born into servitude. A global index on modern slavery showed on Thursday. Black Laws, the 4th edition. Servitude, the condition of being bound to service, the state of a person who is subjected voluntarily or otherwise to another person as his servant. So we're looking at the word servitude. We looked into Black Laws, the 4th edition, to find out what it was meaning and what it was describing for that word. Now we saw that it said it's the state of a person. So that's basically saying the state or condition, meaning this person is being in, or it is a reality that the person is facing. It's a person who is subjected voluntarily or otherwise. That's what it states, voluntarily or otherwise. Now, if you're in servitude voluntarily, what's the opposite of that? It's a forced subjection. So it's a person who is subjected voluntarily or otherwise, forced, to another person as his or her servant. So this is what servitude means. It means that an individual, a person, is being forced or is voluntarily submitted, subjected, bowed their knee down to serve another person. That's servitude. So servitude can be voluntary, breaks down into being voluntary, or servitude can be forced upon you. And that servitude is to serve another person. So this other person has a will, has desires, and has wants. And they request that you fulfill, you serve them voluntarily or perhaps forcibly. You serve their will, their desires, and their wants. And you have no choice. You have to fulfill this person's will, desires, and wants. That's because you're being held in servitude and you have to give them service. When someone is in servitude to another person, the one that they are serving or have pledged allegiance to have rules. They have duties and things that they require and want the servant to perform. They exercise a medium of control, a power of control over the servant. That's why it's called servitude. So the person requires something and the servant fulfills the obligation, and that's the control. We, as individuals, have a human right and fundamental freedom that says no one can hold us or force us into servitude. Oath or affirmation of citizenship for Canada. I swear or affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors, and that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. Black Laws, the 4th edition. Allegiance, the obligation of fidelity and obedience which the individual owes to the government under which he lives, or to his sovereign in return for the protection he receives. It may be an absolute and permanent obligation, or it may be a qualified and temporary one. The citizen or subject owes an absolute and permanent allegiance to his government or sovereign, or at least until, by some open and distinct act, he renounces it, and becomes a citizen or subject of another government or another sovereign. What they've done here in Canada is that they forced the Canadian citizen, a Canadian citizen, has pledged allegiance to the Queen. Queen Elizabeth II, who is titled or designated Queen of Canada. And through that Pledge of Allegiance, now they have produced upon their own self an obligation of fidelity and obedience to the Queen. Because the Queen is the sovereign of Canada. So they take on a responsibility of obligation, of fidelity and obedience to the Queen, and they're being held in servitude and are serving the Queen. How? Through the enactments, regulations. That's why you see when you read the enactments and the regulations, it says, therefore, Her Majesty, with the advice and consent of the Senate and the House of Commons, therefore grants royal assent to such and such laws. It's Her Majesty that's giving royal assent to the laws, and these laws, these rules, these obligations and duties, through the enactments, are placed upon the servant, who's in servitude, who's pledged allegiance, that Canadian citizen. Now, in that article that we saw recently, it said 30 million people across the world are being held in slavery, and they use the example servitude. Well, whoever wrote that article forgot to include Canada, because as of 2013, we're 35 million Canadian citizens here, and all of these Canadian citizens, through a pledge of allegiance, had been rendered in a position of servitude, whether knowingly or unknowingly, whether voluntarily or forced. They've been placed into a position of servitude and are presently serving the Queen Elizabeth II through her enactments and regulations, her rules. You're looking at StatsCan population information for Canada. In 1996, it was 29 million. In 2006, it was 32 million. In 2011, there was 34,482,779 Canadian citizens. I hear this question a lot from individuals who don't understand what's transpiring in the law and don't understand what's transpiring against them personally. Why? Why does the government have so much power over me? Why can the government interfere with my life? Why does the government have such a reach into my life that is taking my energy, taking my money, taking my finances? You have to understand that you're being held in servitude. You personally who are watching this video, you're being held in servitude, and they're claiming that you've given your allegiance to Her Majesty, and therefore you are a subject of Her Majesty. And because you are a subject of Her Majesty and you have freely given your allegiance and you are in servitude to her, you must follow her rules and you must follow her regulations. So you must follow the laws. And these laws, when you study them and you look at them, these laws are meant to hurt the individual. They take from the individual. They remove from our energy. They remove from our finances a part, and they give it over to this whole garbage. So human life here in Canada, just to be alive and have human life, is taxed at least 40%. And what I mean by that is that if you are going out and earning, gaining, or pursuing a living, then every time, weekly or bi-weekly, when you get a check, they remove taxes off of this. Now they've taught you and they teach you that it's for a system for the society to support welfare, to support unemployment insurance, to support old age security, to support Medicare. I'm not going to get into that right now, but they tell you nevertheless, this is why we're taking taxes off of you. Then you go and you try and buy food at the grocery store and you're taxed again. You try and buy clothing to keep yourself warm from the elements of nature and you're taxed again. You try and buy gas for transportation and you're taxed again. So when you add up all these taxes that they've thrown upon us or thrown at that Canadian citizen, that one who's in servitude, you're looking at even more than 40%. But let's just say it's 40% taxes upon the human life. So before you even get a piece of the money that you've earned through your energy, that you've pursued after through your energy, it's costing you 40%. And that 40%, if you really did a research and checked it out, the majority of that does not go to support a society for mutual benefit, but goes into families who are controlling this world. Families who are sitting in the position of hierarchy, the ones who have constructed this system, they are reaping from it and taking from our lives. When you sit back and just think about it, apart from anything else that's going on, you realize that nobody has the right to force you into being their subject or servant. No one has the right to force you into servitude, to hold you in bondage. That's just natural understanding. Now, if we study law and we look into international covenants and domestic law, we see that this understanding, this natural right, has been expressed through law already. Canada has an obligation to respect the International Human Rights Instrument. This is the instruments that come out of the United Nations. Now, this endorsement concerning the International Human Rights Instrument is not a global endorsement for the UN, and I'll leave it at that. Nevertheless, back in the day, in 68 and in 48, when they made the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, men and women got together and recognized and understood naturally that nobody can be forced to become a subject or a servant of another individual. If they willfully choose, voluntarily choose, that's different. But to be forced, you can't do that. So they decided that they would enshrine this right for men and women in something that was titled the International Human Rights Instrument. And Canada was a signatory to this covenant and therefore has an obligation to respect these rights. And when you look into this instrument, particularly in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 8.2, it clearly states that no one, no man, no woman, no child shall be held in servitude. This is a fundamental right and freedom that I possess. I don't possess it because this says it. I possess this because I understand it, here and here. I've woken up to that fact, that I shouldn't allow myself, or nobody has the right, to force anybody else to be their subject or servant. And in law, that's what they've done to us. However, because they did enshrine this right and fundamental freedom, I have where to go to call upon the expression of this right, to call upon the expression of this freedom. And it's supposed to be recognized by Canada because they have an obligation to allow me as an individual to decide if I will be in servitude or not. And as you've seen here in Canada, they've rendered that Canadian citizen in a position of pledging allegiance to the Queen and serving her through her laws and obeying her laws. The International Covenant on Civil, Political Rights, Article 8.2. No one shall be held in servitude. That's a right, that's a freedom that's been recognized, and that is ours as an individual to invoke, to claim, to stand under, and to exercise.